Hi there everybody, and welcome to episode 242 of The Art of Procurement. I've been looking forward to sharing today's episode with you for a few weeks now. So as many of you may know, we kicked off a sponsored webinar series called AOP Live. AOP Live sessions allow procurement professionals and subject matter experts to explore specific topics, and we do that in real time because they're designed to facilitate lots of interaction between all participants. And what's important is not just during the session, but before and after as well. So as part of the run-up to an AOP Live session, we facilitate questions. We can get lots of questions, at least we did in this first one. Over 35 questions were asked by registrants for me to pose to the guest of the session. So it makes it all about the questions that you as a registrant are interested in hearing about from the guest that we have in the AOP Live. As part of the AOP Lives, there's no slides. It's all about conversation. So today's podcast is actually a recording of our first AOP Live session. We had it last month in February, and it features Sammeli Sammalkorpi. Now, Sammeli is co-founder of procurement analytics company Sievo. Sievo were the sponsor of this webinar. And in the session, we explored the use of automation in procurement, and we wanted to get real. We wanted to bring the overhyped AI conversation back down to earth and then help you actually put a game plan in place. And if you enjoy the discussion, I would highly recommend you download a workbook that we developed with Sievo. It's called Your Procurement AI Game Plan Workbook. It's packed full of the insights that we explored in our conversation, and it provides questions that help you start to develop your own AI game plan. You'll be able to download that at artofprocurement.com/gameplan. That's artofprocurement.com/gameplan. And I'll come back at the end of today's podcast with details again of how you can download that if the conversation was something that really struck a chord and is something that you have interest in digging a little bit deeper into. So with all that being said, I'm going to just roll the tape, go straight into the webinar with Sammeli and take it from the top. We have a bunch of questions, put you on the hot seat. Mm-hmm. Sammeli is the co-founder and a vice president at Sievo. And my take on Sievo is that you essentially make sense of procurement data. So you take a lot of data that's out there, you make sense of it, you help turn it into essentially something that is actionable for procurement professionals. Is that a fair reflection, or have I done you a disservice?
No. Thanks, Phil. I think you hit the nail on the head. So really, our job at Sievo is to take all kind of procurement data, internal, external data, capture that, process that, and turn that into insights that our clients can act on and really kind of create business value out of that.
So the first question for people who are familiar with the podcast that I run, I always ask my guests whether procurement found them or whether they found procurement. So Sammeli, how did you get involved in procurement?
Actually, sort of, I guess it's both. If my parents would have had the option to choose, they would have given me a career as a reindeer farmer. So I was really born in northern Finland in Lapland, and my parents dreamed that their son will become a reindeer farmer. But when I was finalizing my university studies, I realized it's definitely not the reindeer farming. Mm-hmm. And so I did what let's say you do when you don't know what you want to do, and I went to be a management consultant.
Right.
And actually ended up doing a lot of procurement specific stuff. So doing procurement analytics job on Excel and stuff. But I also had this, let's say, software engineer background. So I figured out, okay, there must be a way to combine my software engineering sort of experience with, let's say, newly founded love with procurement. So in that sense, I guess when we founded Sievo 15 years ago, it was also me selecting the procurement function.
So I guess you could always go back to retire to reindeer farming, when you've had enough of the corporate world.
That is always my plan B, so I can always go back to reindeer farming.
So the first question I wanted to ask you today is, I wanted just to be a little bit clear on terminology. So we hear AI, we hear machine learning. Is there any differences between the two of them?
Yeah, really good question. And for me, sort of the AI is perhaps the umbrella term. There's a lot of things within the AI. There's a natural language processing. You can also think robotics as part of the AI. But really, the machine learning for me is a subset of AI. It's something. It's kind of basically detecting statistics automatically using software. And then really for me, the machine learning is the most interesting area of the AI. It is really the underlying reason why there's so much hype and discussion about the AI, because machine learning is really starting to have very concrete business applications.
So what else would fall under that banner of AI then, if machine learning is only one part of that?
Yeah. So for example, natural language processing, which is sort of really trying to make sense of natural language, whether spoken or written, is part of the AI for me as well. Also, if you take the wide interpretation of the AI, some of the robotic stuff, kind of sensing, seeing, and so forth, would also fall under the AI. There's also stuff which is not AI. For example, RPA, robotic process automation, for me is not AI. It's just sort of software scripting.
So a lot of AI, we're not kind of clear what goes behind the scenes. You kind of know that there's an input and there's an output. And in between is a little bit of a black box. I wonder if you could help us kind of demystify, how does AI actually work? Without being too scientific, I guess.
That's a challenge. And let me focus on the machine learning, because for me, that's really the core of the business applications for procurement. And even if you take machine learning, there's a different kind of machine learning. There's the unsupervised machine learning, there's the supervised. But really, let me try to explain the supervised one. I think that's the most common one. So if you, at the end of the day, machine learning is a new kind of software, but it's still software. And traditional software is something where you really need to kind of create the rules and define the rules, create the logic in a very explicit way in the software. It's like, let's say I'm trying to as a soccer coach, I try to train a kid, and I explicitly say, under these circumstances, if A, then B, if C, then D, you kind of give that explicit set of rules. So that's traditional software. Whereas machine learning is something that you basically say to the kid, okay, watch me doing that. And you sort of do it yourself and you teach, and then this machine learning algorithm starts to learn from what you are doing. So instead of explicitly telling the rules, you kind of say, observe me, and then the machine learning algorithms will kind of figure out what you are doing without you explicitly saying what is going under the hood.
Right. And so would it then be programmed in a way that the machine is essentially asking you questions to help validate some assumptions, and then that's one of the ways that it then learns, because it builds the answers into its ability essentially to make that decision the next time?
The typical approach is basically that you provide the machine learning algorithm a training data set. So let's say we want to teach the machine to kind of separate cats from dogs. So what do? You have 1,000 pictures of cats, 1,000 pictures of dogs, and then a human goes and says, that's a cat, that's a dog, that's a cat, and you do it 1,000 times. But then you give that training data set to an algorithm and say, this is how I've been clustering cats and dogs. Now here's next 1,000 pictures, go and make sense out of that. And again, when you think about that, if I would ask you, Phil, give the exact rules of how do you differentiate cat from dog. It's actually quite difficult, even though you can really say cat from a dog from a picture.
Yeah, because you start thinking, well, they got 4 legs, they got eyes, they got tails. How do I actually differentiate them from one another?
Exactly. But now the point is that you don't need to be able to explain how you do that. You just provide training data set to machine learning and say, hey, here's a sample, and take care of the rest.
Yeah. So then if the learning starts with a human, and this is a question that Nick asked before we jumped on the call, was with AI being programmed by humans, how can we actually remove the human bias for the insights that AI then provides, or the machine learning then provides?
That's actually a super good question, because sort of the AI is only as good or bad as the behavior we show the AI. It's only as good as the training set we have. For some applications, you can really take out the human bias. So, for example, if you have a mole in your skin, and sort of traditionally somebody would say if it's a benign or malign, and you could capture that information. But in this case, you actually can kind of take the test, and you finally know whether it was a good or bad one, and you can really train the machine with the objective information. And in that case, the machine will become better than human, because it really learns from all the end results. But then there are other applications where it's super hard. So for example, more and more AI is used to kind of process employer candidates, go through the CVs and applications. And let's say you have recruiters who have a bias based on gender or sort of ethnic base or something like that. All of those biases would be coded into the process, and it's super hard to get rid of that. And the only way is to really make sure that you have the right training data set. So in this example, it shouldn't be only one person kind of going through and training the machine, but there should be a number of different opinions put to the kind of picture to train the machine.
So I know we're going to talk about AI in procurement in a little bit, but it's just a question that comes up as I think about that. You know, in your example of the software that you build, who is teaching the software? Are you teaching the software, or is it actually taught by the user taking into account their essential use case? So do you control that environment, or is that environment controlled by a client?
Yeah, sort of the overall process is controlled by us, but we definitely go and capture the category expertise from the actual end users. So if I would need to classify all different kind of sugas in the world, I'm not the expert in different kind of sugas or syrups, but there's a category manager who's really expert in that, and we would provide tools for that category manager to kind of train us on the syrups and sugas, but then we capture that information, and then we can reuse that information for all the future syrups and sugas that we really encounter.
Okay. Well, I want to move on to talk more broadly about the use of AI in procurement. And it's a question that we got from a number of different participants in today's session: Greg, Eric, Pamitra, Nick, amongst a few others. And it's a pretty, I think, fundamental question. And that's, how is AI actually used to support procurement today? And, you know, have you got any concrete examples just to kind of demonstrate that?
Yeah. And I think there's a increasing number of great examples how AI machine learning can add value in procurement. And let me provide a few examples. First of all, we at Sievo, one of the, let's say, primary applications is this spend classification, very classical procurement analytics challenge. I have 50 million invoices. How do I know which ones are IT services, which are legal services, and so forth? And there we use AI. Basically, we create a training data set. We go through a sample of transactions. We classify them well, but then the machine learning will take care of the rest. So I think that's one example of a traditional machine learning classification challenge, kind of differentiating cats from dogs, differentiating sort of the IT laptops from professional services. Very similar challenge in a way. But there's, of course, other sort of applications as well. One very interesting one is regarding, let's say, capturing supplier information from public sources. If you take any supplier, there's a lot of news and noise around those suppliers in the internet, in the Facebook, in the social media, and so forth. And that's an area where you can use AI, natural language processing, and so forth to really capture all of that data, put that data together, and really try to isolate the noise from the signal to kind of convey the right messages to procurement users. So I think that's also very interesting, as of today, real-time live example of AI in procurement. A third example I'd like to mention is then kind of a bit similar but very different, and it's regarding the kind of data locked in contracts. The contract documents, the procurement contracts, purchasing contracts hold a lot of information about the supply, about the terms, about the liability position, and so forth. And traditionally, all of that information was very hard to access because it's unstructured information. But with the modern AI and machine learning, you can, let's say, automatically run through those 200-page contracts and try to kind of identify all the key terms without, let's say, having a human intervention.
It was an example that I did a podcast on, actually, probably maybe 3 or 4 months ago. And this was more on the sales side, but it was still related to contracts, where they were pulling in contracts, and then essentially the technology that they had was telling the lawyers which were the terms that they really needed to be concerned about based on what it was that they were buying. So you didn't need to spend 90% of your time negotiating on clauses that weren't really that important.
Exactly.
You could spend your 10% on the ones that were, and they may not be the ones that you expected. And also knowing that these other clauses weren't that material to you, as they programmed kind of the intelligence into it, they then realized what they could quickly give away in a negotiation, as long as they would then get you know, the what they wanted for the 10% of the clauses that were important.
I think that's a great example as well. So really kind of trying to bring the essential information out of the lot of data and noise.
So as we think about using AI within procurement, I want to ask about processes. Do you find that that organizations that use it change their processes to accommodate AI generally, or whether the technology is just dropped into an existing process? And I think this talks a little bit to change management, or whether it's just something that drops in, whether you really have to change the way that you operate to maximize the benefit of AI.
Yeah, sort of. By and large, I believe that AI can be applied, let's say, to existing states. So it's not like you need to fix something before you can start to kind of capture the benefits from AI. Mm-hmm. At the same time, if there's, let's say, one advice how to prepare yourself to leveraging AI now and 3 years, 5 years from now, I think it goes to try to capture as much data as you can. Even if you can't process all of that data right now, mm-hmm. but if you have vast data amounts accessible in 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, you may be able to benefit them in surprising ways.
Yeah.
So capture the data even though you don't know how to use it.
Yeah, so even if the capability doesn't exist to do what you want to do with it, then at least you have it for the time, when the time comes when you can use that data.
Exactly. And if I think of, let's say, contract documents or any unstructured text, like 5-10 years ago, it was not really data that could be leveraged within the software. The data software could leverage was really around master data, give me perfect master data and do good analytics. But now, surprisingly, all of those unstructured data sets, contract, supplier noise, and so forth, is becoming very sort of valuable source of information. So just stack your information and we'll make use of it in 5 years, if not now.
Right. So one of the questions I had, and I had this both from Paul and Patrick, was, is AI in procurement, is it only for larger organizations, or is there a business case for a small company too?
Yeah, that's also a great question. And sort of, to some extent, one way to, let's say, demystify machine learning is that whenever you hear machine learning or AI, just think about software. So if the question is there a business case for software in smaller organizations? There definitely is. If I look how software is being used in SMEs, it's of course used everywhere. Yeah. But perhaps sort of how you approach may be different. If you are Amazon or Deutsche Telekom or Walmart, you can invest in your own machine learning team and create from scratch your own, let's say,
built for purpose.
Exactly, built for purpose stuff. But if I'm an SME, I wouldn't go and try to build my own ERP. I wouldn't try to build my own machine learning application, but just look for the right software providers to emerge that will capture the machine learning as part of their software.
And I just want to pause for a second just to invite any questions. We'll keep an eye on those, and I will. I have another couple for you in this topic, Sammeli, but if there's anybody else who has questions, I'll come back to that in a couple of minutes. So start entering them if you have them. Let me go back to a question that I had here. Do you recommend that there's a certain amount of process or digital maturity for a company before they start exploring machine learning or AI?
No, not really. I think it's sort of the machine learning and AI is very, let's say, democratic in the sense that almost by design, sort of, as long as you have some data, then you can start applying that. I actually feel it's for some of the sophisticated traditional software, you really need to have your data and process in shape, and that's sort of the underlying assumption. Whereas the underlying assumption for a lot of, let's say, machine learning is more like, throw me any data and I will be able to make sense out of that. And also a lot of the machine learning and AI capabilities also are based on data that can be captured outside your organization. So in that sense, it's also very democratic. It's both SMEs and Amazons of the world can access Google in the same way. So it's
just about building APIs into those data sources.
Exactly.
So because we're challenged as procurement with not having good data. And as I'm sure you see more than anybody, because that's your business, in seeing procurement data, and that often stops us from doing something because you think, well, bad data in, bad data out. Now, is machine learning a solution or a cure to that, or is it just going to kind of push the problem down to another piece of reporting that the software application ultimately gives?
Let me actually challenge this underlying assumption: bad data in, bad data out, because as one of our clients, one of the CPOs said, data which is never used will never get to be a good data. So you need to create this business pull, business desire to get high quality data. And therefore, if you want to wait that your master data is perfect before you start to build business applications, you'll be waiting until you retire and start reindeer farming. But if you start aggressively to leverage data with all the flaws right now and today, that creates an incentive to improve the data. So you need to create the business pool, business need for having good data, and not the other way around. Now, having said that, I guess I'm echoing my previous comment around, to some extent, machine learning AI is more allowing for mistakes because it can leverage the more noisy, more unstructured data sets. So even if you don't have such a high quality data, you can still leverage all of the benefits from AI.
Yeah. Another question. I think I covered that one. So let's say, so we're thinking about learning more about AI and AI in procurement. And I set this up, I'm going to go into talking about your game plan in a moment. But before I do, like, where do you recommend that people actually go to learn more about AI and machine learning and its potential applications? Because ultimately that's where we get so much of our information, is going to all these different third-party sources. Where do you go?
Yeah, I think sort of as an introduction, if you really want to familiarize yourself with the concept, I think there's an online course called Elements of AI. And I think that's very accessible sort of source of information. So Elements of AI, that's sort of an intro kind of getting into the world. Then for more, let's say, ongoing listen and learn and stay tuned sort of stuff, I know, Phil, you are a big fan of podcasts, so I would recommend podcast actually called Data Skeptic, which I have enjoyed very much in terms of, let's say, listening into.
Interesting. Well, what we'll do is we'll make sure we capture those in the downloadable so that folks can go and check them out. But I think it's always interesting to see, like, how can we learn about these topics? I had a question that's on a similar note. This is from Patrick. And Patrick asked, is there anything like a Forrester wave or a magic quadrant from Gartner for AI providers, specifically for procurement?
Yeah. Sort of, I don't know there would be. And also sort of for me, the way you should think about is not, you should think it from the business application point of view and not really, let's say, technology driven, not ML, AI driven. Because if I think of the procurement applications, most of the value of the AI will be embedding that into existing solutions, existing contract management, existing procurement analytics. So in that sense, the AI is more an enabler than an application itself. And for me, there's so much hype and marketing noise about AI right now that people want AI solutions. It's same like saying, I want a software solution. That's not what you need. There's a business problem you need to solve. AI may improve the way to solve it, but still you need to start thinking from the business perspective first.
Right. So this leads to an interesting follow-on question then. Do you see that advances in machine learning are providing like new product opportunities, if you will, or new, that you can do things that you couldn't do before in completely new ways? Or is it really making what we did before better and smarter and more intelligent?
I think it's both. I think with the current state of the AI and machine learning, where the AI is really good at the really narrow use cases, it's more about creating speed and agility for the existing solutions.
Right.
Things may change 5 years from now, but the current challenge with any AI is that it's super good on narrow solutions. So it can separate cats from dogs, but it couldn't hold this webinar. And when you start to think about the business application in the procurement space that are super narrow, there are some, but they are not going to fundamentally change the way we do procurement right now and here.
So they're not necessarily talking to each other along a whole process with lots of ifs and thens on a kind of linear basis. It's more, here's one specific use case. Machine learning can be used to do that one specific thing, but there still needs to be the human element between it that connects all the dots.
Exactly. And if I take something like the spend classification from our context, which is super sort of, in a way, simple use case, you just need to kind of classify spend into clusters. Yes, we leverage a lot of machine learning, different kind of machine learning technologies there, but it still requires a certain amount of human intervention here and there. So even for this very simple use case, there's still a collaboration element required. And to some extent, I feel like when people speak and hear about AI, they are looking for that magical next generation sort of insight coming in. But that's the wrong place to look at. I think where people should look for machine learning AI applications is on the boring stuff, because that's where it really works. So if you want to find a good business case, think about the most boring task you have in the procurement function, which is probably something you've outsourced to a BPO or something you perhaps offshore to an offshore location. That sort of routine tasks yield well into machine learning.
Right.
Creating a procurement strategy is not in the top 5 things that will come up.
Yeah, so that leads to a good question as we start getting into the game plan, and I think that's a good place to start is what you've outsourced already, for example, what's highly tactical. What kind of things should we be thinking about? Maybe there's some tips that you have over and above that in terms of actually selecting the right application.
Yeah. I think that's, for me, it's really kind of there's, I would say, 3 criteria that you should look at when you think whether and where I should apply machine learning, and also how I should apply that. I think the first is what I already mentioned, sort of look for the boring applications. That's where the success will be. It's not advice, but I think that just makes sense. The second thing is something I already alluded towards, like think whether it's something you should do in-house or if it's something that you can buy off the shelf. It's classical make or buy. And it kind of, again, if you think not about machine learning, but about software, what applications you want to build software in-house and where you just go for the off-the-shelf providers. Yeah. So to really build a made-for-purpose machine learning application, I guess you need to have a business problem which is very unique to your business, and you need to have big enough, let's say, business opportunity to act on. And also the challenge here is it's not only about the machine learning capabilities and data science capabilities, it's also about who has the largest data set to train on.
Right.
So if I think of the spend classification, yes, a client may have 1 billion euro of spend that they process. We process 1 trillion. So we have 1,000-fold advantage already. Yeah. So Amazons of the world will be building their sort of applications. For vast majority of the companies out there, it's better to find the right partners for different pockets to actually partner with. And then the third challenge for procurement functions is that I consider us as Sievo, we are kind of fast-growing, SaaS, cool company, and it's hard for us to find the data science, software engineering capability. And with all honesty, if I think an average procurement organization, how can they position themselves to find the right talent and maintain the right talent on machine learning capabilities? I have some doubts. So therefore, I would say, in most cases, it's better off trying to find the right partners rather than try to build it for yourself.
Interesting. It's an interesting comment you made there about data scientists, because I hear more and more procurement organizations looking or trying to build a center of excellence that includes data scientists and, having varying degrees of success in doing so. Is that something that we should be pursuing, or should we be looking at how do we help our existing procurement team members actually become more fluent in data? Yeah.
And sort of, again, instead of thinking of data scientists, I would think about software engineering. It's a bit of same stuff. How many procurement functions really believe they should have a team of software engineers specific for their purposes? I'm not seeing many. Yeah. And by the same token, I would say it's not a sustainable strategy trying to kind of recruit and maintain a team of data scientists. Perhaps the largest companies of the globe may be an exception, but for most organizations, that's not the case. So to tap into that talent, I would either kind of go for the corporate central resources that may have a data science team, and alternatively and increasingly go to, let's say, existing software providers who sort of have built that capability into their software.
Now, we talked a little bit, and maybe this is just going back a little bit to the question before about selecting the right application. You gave kind of the 3 considerations, but when you think of actual applications that are in the market, I mean, what does that basically align with in terms of what's available? Which bits of the procurement value chain, for example, are really even have had machine learning kind of integrated into them today?
I guess a lot of the hype is just hype. So in terms of, let's say, how much of the value created by procurement software is truly machine learning driven, I think if you look at the marketing papers, that's 70%. But if you look at the actual reality, I think it's more like 1 to 3%. But it just needs to position it machine learning because that's sort of where the hype is.
Yeah, and if you don't, everybody else is.
Exactly. And don't get me wrong, I think it's going to fundamentally change things a lot in 5 to 10 years. But in terms of right now and here, it is really these select applications, contract extraction, spend classification, supplier market information, and so forth. And also, again, we need to think it from the business application point of view. If I think, for example, opportunity identification based on the spend data, which is one of the core things we do, for most use cases, traditional what-if algorithms are better than machine learning. There are some cases where machine learning rules, but in some cases, you just want to tell the kid that do this, don't do that. It's like, don't go to offside. That's pretty clear sort of a rule that you can give.
So how can a procurement professional or a leader who's deciding whether to make an investment in what they believe to be AI, because that's what it says on the box, how can they actually differentiate between what truly is machine learning versus what may be more marketing hype?
Yeah, for me, the only way, if you really want to make that distinction, you really need to start to go quite a bit of details, what sort of algorithms are being used. And somewhere in the sales organization, there needs to be a person that tells, yes, for this specific purpose, we are using Microsoft Light Gradient Boosting Machine, and this is how we create training data set and so forth. So that's the only way for me to kind of differentiate the hype from the reality.
Okay.
Then at the end of the day, does it really matter if you get the business benefit you're looking for?
Yeah. That's a really good question. I mean, it's actually pretty fundamental too. Are you buying because you want to buy new technology or what you believe is new technology, or are you buying for an outcome?
Exactly.
And I think a lot of us, we buy not necessarily looking at the outcome, you're looking at the specification. This is what it's going to drive.
Yeah, exactly.
There was a question.
Actually, Phil and Sammeli,
Yes.
Hi, this is Kelly. I'm going to break in here. This is fantastic, and thank you to everybody that's participating in the chat. I'm sort of fielding the comments as they come in. We did have one question that came in response to what you guys were discussing about ROI. And this is sort of another look at that. The question from Jens is, how long would you need to train an AI to be able to drive meaningful results?
Yeah, it's a good question. Of course, the classical answer really depends on what sort of, let's say, use case and benefits you want to get out of the system. Typically, actually, the training itself is just one piece in the process. There's the data acquisition, data preparation, training, application validation, and so forth. So the actual sort of the training piece is typically more like, depending on the use case, but sort of hours or days of the work. But then, of course, the whole cycle, if you really build something from scratch, it's typically at least weeks, if not months, depending on the application, to kind of really build the whole pipeline from data acquisition to kind of a result reviews.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Kelly?
As a matter of fact, there was one other that came in. This is actually from Amy. She was asking about what is more important if you're trying to sort of diagnose your current preparedness to take some exploratory steps into AI. What is it more important that you have at the outset? A really solid data set that you can apply the AI to, or a known business case, such as knowing that I want to be able to separate cats from dogs? Is it easier to figure out exactly where to point the AI, or is it easier to come up with a data set if you don't currently have one?
No, really great question, and I think you need to have both perspectives. Unless you have business case, there's no point of doing anything. But then at the same time, if you have great business case but no data to support, the results will be equally sort of void. So I would say you need to have, let's say, iterative dialogue between, okay, what are the meaningful business problems for me and what sort of data sets I have to support those business case. And then try to find a combination where you have both the business case but also the underlying data set.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. And I had a question on ROI here as well. As you're looking at building the business case for the investment in AI, what are you looking for? Are you encouraging people to think of this as being, cost neutral to start with because you're exploring new technology? Or are they certain value drivers that you consider as part of your investment? And I guess as I'm asking the question, I'm thinking it goes to the question as well before: are you looking at the outcome you're buying, or are you buying a technology?
Yeah, and I strongly believe that whatever you do in business, you should have, let's say, kind of some sort of short-term results to kind of prove that it creates value, but also drive the change within the organization. And if I look at the AI business cases in procurement, they typically fall in two clusters of cases. One cluster is sort of the identification cases. By applying AI on top of certain data sets, we are able to identify new sources of value, new opportunities, new suppliers, new risk or something like that, which is typically yields itself pretty well to one-off project. You can take a project and let's look at the data and try to identify, for example, contracts we should renegotiate or something like that. And there the business case is typically based on the assumption that you will identify some new sources of value. The second cluster of business cases for me is more like, okay, we have these operations in-house or outsourced where we do a lot of manual stuff on a recurring basis. And here the business case is more like, okay, let's try to teach the machine learning AI to do what our people currently do. Yeah. And that's sort of more, it's not a one-off business case, it's a recurring business case. And it's also more challenging because you need to create an operating model where you continuously acquire the data, process the data, validate the data, and so forth. But also the results are very sustainable because then you can reduce your kind of ongoing OPEX costs.
So what are some of the risks then that you see most present in deploying machine learning or AI in procurement?
Yeah, I think for the AI, you must not think AI as a sort of a separate black box, but you need to consider AI as a collaboration partner or something like assistant to you. And you need to have the right level of trust in AI. If you have too much trust, you just let the AI operate and it will create any results, good or bad, and it will go haywire. So you cannot completely trust the AI, you need to validate, but at the same time, if you decide that each and every decision made by AI, you will go and micromanage, then you are not getting the benefits of the AI. So it's the same with kids in soccer. You need to trust and give some level of freedom, but at the same time, you need to be there, present and coach and guide them going forward. So right level of trust.
So that led to a question then. What does governance look like? So how do you actually govern machine learning? How do you govern a machine?
Yeah, I think there's three kinds of human-machine collaboration models when it comes to AI. The first is what is called, let's say, human interloop, which basically means that machine does something, but whatever it does, there's always human to oversee the result and approve, disapprove, and so forth, which is good approach if those decisions are super critical, or if there's a rather small number of those decisions to be made and they are high value. So if it's like cancer diagnosis, I'd like my doctor to validate each of those decisions as such. That's human interloop. Then there's the human onto-loop, which means that the machine does the stuff on its own, but there's a human supervising the process. And this really works well when you have, let's say, routine tasks like spend classification. If spend goes to wrong place, it's bad, but it's not like anybody's going to die. And there you don't want to intervene all the decisions because by getting out the loop, you sort of save the money and create a cost effectiveness. Then the third one is human off the loop, which is like, okay, I just want to let the machine learning run and go rogue, and there's no way for me to intervene. As of today's procurement world, that's not really the application. But if you think, for example, the financial markets and high-frequency trading, where the speed is of essence, there you need to let the machine do the decisions because human is just too slow to intervene. So I think whenever you apply machine learning, you should think what sort of model you want to apply. Human interloop, I will change or approve each decision. Human onto loop, human actively supervises, or human off the loop, I let the machine run and trust it sort of does its job.
Now, do you find that some people will start at the first one and then go to the second when they get more trust in the machine?
That's definitely sort of one approach, that you start with more intervention, then you go to next steps. One of the mistakes I see is that people mentally think about the third model or second model, and when the results are not satisfactory, they blame the AI, whereas perhaps they selected the wrong model, or perhaps they gave the wrong role model to the machine. Right. So if your kids don't behave, it's really up to your, let's say, behavior models you've given.
Great. And I just want to stop as well and encourage, again, if you've got any more questions, please keep them coming. And I will keep an eye on the chat here, but Kelly, you jump in as well if you see anything else coming through.
As a matter of fact, if I can jump in right now, we have a really interesting new question from Nicholas. And before I share his question, I feel like I also need to share that he offered up that he's in Maui. So kudos, Nicholas.
Yeah.
Doesn't even really matter what your question is. You're already ahead of the rest of us because we're not in Maui. So
I'm jealous already.
I know. So his question is about, we talked about data sources, and I think mostly we've assumed that we're talking about what is your company's data source that you're going to be applying to the AI to. But he's taking sort of a bigger view, and he's asking, are you able to discuss the considerations of a communal effort? So a platform that brings together the data sets of multiple companies in an industry, or just playing different companies at the same level of maturity, maybe playing in the same space, versus focusing on in-house development where it would be solely driven by your organization, maybe a smaller data set, but then maybe also more applicable results.
Yeah, that's really great insight and question. And there's definitely different kind of data sets that you can apply. There's the, let's say, at one extreme you have, let's say, internal data sets, which is your company data. At the other extreme, you really have the publicly available data in the internet and so forth. But there's definitely something in between, which is more sort of a ecosystem data or partnership data and so forth. And there's different applications. There's risk information sharing platforms. We at Sievo, we provide benchmarking services to our clients where we take data from all of our clients and share it within the ecosystem. So really one part of, let's say, your AI strategy should be around what is my data acquisition strategy? What do I have in-house? What is publicly available? And where I need to partner or buy certain additional data elements.
Thanks. Did that answer the question?
I believe it did. Okay. Hopefully it did, Nicholas. If it didn't, look out the window and enjoy being in Maui.
Yeah. So I have a question from Sid that we got before we started today. And he referenced some technology. I'm not going to reference it, but it's a technology that's heavily marketed as being machine learning and AI. And his experience was that, some of this technology is built for developers, not necessarily built for everyday users. Yeah. He was asking, what kind of considerations do you take into account to help to make the AI usable for non-technically minded users? And I think that's both in the outputs, but as I'm thinking about the conversation we've had today, it's, the human interaction in that, the governance and in the learning and the training of the machine at the same time.
Yeah, and I feel that fundamentally the machine learning technologies and algorithms and so forth, to master them, you need to have a strong interest and education in that sort of stuff, statistics, software engineering, and so forth, and really kind of exploring, exposing the full raw capacity to an average procurement user. An average user will not work. Instead, I think it's the role of the machine learning application developers to make it easy for the end users. And if I use an example of Google search engine, my mother can really use Google pretty well, even though she doesn't really understand how it works underneath. Yeah. And I think in the same way, same applies for machine learning. You need to develop applications that end users can use without realizing or caring whether there's sort of a machine learning in the background and how it's used. There is one specific point that part of the supervised machine learning process is to capture the training data from the users, capture the expert insights. And there I believe machine learning specialists need to develop user interfaces that really help people to provide their expertise in a way that they are not exposed to the complexities of the machine learning. Mm-hmm. So imagine of a screen where you need to click whether this is a cat or a dog, you can create an easy interface for capturing that intel, even though the end user doesn't understand how it's applied in machine learning level.
So when you are working with a new client and you're integrating your technology, do you typically recommend that client has somebody who has that kind of understanding of the statistics and the data and an interest in the technology itself, or is that really not important?
That's not important. I think kind of going back to the question, sort of the machine learning is fundamentally so statistically complex that I feel it's our job to kind of take care of that level of complexity and just provide the friendly user interfaces for our clients to capture that intel.
Okay. Kelly, was another question came in? I see a number jumped up on our Q&A box.
Actually, it was a follow-up from Nicholas.
Okay.
Thanking for the response,
okay.
But also talking about when it comes to applying AI, is it the company level considerations that are more important, or are we early enough on in the overall business application of AI that it's more general cross-industry, even potentially cross-function applications that we should be looking at, very broad, typical, maybe even consumer-proven driven applications of AI versus looking specifically at my company and what could my company or my function do with AI?
And I think sort of that's really good question. And sort of the AI applications will come, of course, in a lot of different shapes and forms. Some are very function-focused, some are very industry-focused, some are very, very problem domain focused. The same way that you have different kind of software. You have software for a certain industry, for a certain problem, and so forth. And in the same way, the machine learning AI innovation will realize itself in different shapes and forms. What I do believe is the AI will be very similar to software in the sense that most of the winning applications will be something which is developed by a company for a large number of, let's say, client base. Because in AI, it's not only about the software investment that you need to have, but you also need to have the volumes of the data. And of course, there are sort of third parties who serve multiple different clients are well positioned to capture data from multiple different sources. So I really believe that there's very limited in-house applications for the AI, but most of the innovation and value will be coming from cross-company applications.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, while I have you, another question came in from Matthew, and he was saying, the context, the larger context of this whole conversation is procurement. We've talked mostly straight AI, but it's within the context of procurement that we're looking at it. A two-part question. Is procurement a good first foray entry point for a company looking to do something with AI? And if we are, a follow-up, who functionally or from a title perspective would you recommend the procurement partner with to make the business case to the C-suite to make the effort more successful?
Really good questions. The second one, I think it's easy. I think the procurement, this is naturally procurement IT common sort of domain. So I would definitely partner with IT to kind of address the opportunity. They have the access to data in certain ways. They have a lot of, let's say, required competencies, software engineers, and so forth. So I think procurement IT is the right partner. Interestingly, when it comes to whether the procurement is a good place to start on AI machine learning journey, I think it is. I think the challenge for a lot of procurement organizations really kind of make the business case in a convincing enough way for the management team and so forth. But if I discuss with, let's say, our clients and our CPOs, all of them are exploring pretty much the AI solutions as well. So I think there's definitely the industry-wide understanding that procurement is something where ML and AI can be applied at.
So how would we, just building on that, how would we make the case to the CIO that procurement is the place where he should invest his time in AI or machine learning versus another part of the organization, because he is likely fielding all these kind of requests from from all sides of the business.
I definitely just, it's simple, old-fashioned. You need to have a solid business case. So you need to figure out where the business case is, and when you have the right business case, and when you can prove, I guess when you can prove the business case, you can prove the data, and you can prove that you have some sort of understanding on what machine learning can and cannot do. I think that's sort of the triangle that you need to get right to get CIO's attention.
Okay. I just have a couple of last questions because I know we're coming towards the top of the hour. I just want to look forward, thinking about the art of the possible. This is a question from Tamo, and he asks, that there's a lot of buzzwords out there: machine learning, AI, virtual reality, blockchain, some of the ones in the question. When you start thinking about 5 years, 10 years down the line, where's the biggest opportunity for procurement? Can you even say that right now? I'd love your perspective.
Yeah, I think sort of the different things are the different places of the, let's say, classical hype curve.
Mm-hmm.
If I take something like cloud computing, I think it starts to be a reality already now and here for pretty much all applications. I think sort of something like machine learning, I think we start to be at the peak of the hype curve, so it's discussed a lot, and soon we will get to the reality of what's possible and what's not. Yeah. And it will take them 5 years to really start to capture the big benefits. But really for the machine learning AI, it will change the procurement world. I have no doubt about that. The blockchain, then again, I think it's... I'm not sure if I would put my bets there. And the logic I have is that if blockchain really is successful in supply chain, it will change a lot of things on a very fundamental level. But the challenge with the blockchain is that by the very nature of the blockchain, you need to have pretty much all the members of the value
participants
doing the blockchain for that to be successful. Machine learning, you can pilot company by company, but blockchain is almost like you need to change the full industry at the go.
It's like an all or nothing thing.
Exactly. And it's like I haven't seen a lot of, let's say, traction in supply chain in that area. So I have my doubts.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you, but I obviously remain to be convinced otherwise as we see what applications may be out there. Yeah. But it feels like that's a lot further away from having any impact than technologies like RPA, machine learning, that we're actually starting to see in use today.
I agree very much.
So my last question, unless there's anything else from the line, and I will wait just after I've asked this to see if we get any more questions in, is really thinking about an action item. So I always like to end the podcast that I do on an action item. And what's one thing that you'd recommend that listeners would do today to actually start on the journey of leveraging AI and machine learning in procurement if they've not yet started?
I think it's really sort of this sort of look for the boring applications. That's sort of advice or action item. The people think that AI will magically give you this better procurement strategy, something kind of grand, but it's not going to realize like that. It's going to realize in small bits and pieces, taking some friction out of the process. So look for the boring application. Don't wait the AI to change your job description right now. Whatever you think is boring, go for that.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, any more questions, Kelly, that have come in?
I believe at this point you have covered everyone.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Sammeli, for taking the time to have the conversation. We have, lots more questions that we actually received, both beforehand and that we had to ask you today. So we're going to compile all those together. I know that your team are going to take a look at those and put together a Q&A just so that we have something that we can share with everybody who attended today. So with that, if we don't have anything else, I'm just checking the Q&A and the chat one last time, and I think we're good. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Hi there, it's Phil here. I hope you enjoyed the conversation between Sammeli and I. If this is a topic that interests you, we did partner with Sievo to put together a great workbook. I mentioned this at the top of the podcast that helps translate the topics that we talked about today and turn them into the actions that you can take to actually start building your procurement AI game plan. To get a copy of the workbook, just head over to artofprocurement.com/gameplan. That's artofprocurement.com/gameplan. And I will be with you again next week.